Hello, this is the Torg Eternity Delphi Council Debriefings, where the storm has a name. We are your hosts, Leamon, Jay, and Mark, and today we will be going back to Fires of Ra, doing what we can with Act 3 Expedition into Darkness. Before we get there, we do have an email that we would like to go over, as well as I did want to announce, just in case people worry, the next 2 weeks there will not be a Delphi Council debriefing because I will be on a business trip and not available to record. So don't worry, we will return once I return. In the meantime, though, let's jump into this email, and we do encourage you to email us at torgdcd@gmail.com, and we also will read your email. So this one is short. It says, "Hi guys, thanks for keeping the fire burning. Some short questions about Pan-Pacifica psionics, if I may." We'll break this down into 2 questions so we don't have to reread them. But the first one is, minor telekinesis lists its duration as concentration, but an outstanding success says the duration increases to 6 rounds. What's the correct wording? So this being just a rule question, I will answer officially, and then I'll ask Jay and Mark if they have comments to add. So that is the correct wording. So if you just do it at a standard or good success, you're going to have to concentrate on it. Remember, concentration, you have to make concentration checks if you get damaged. If you get successfully interaction attacked, and other things can make you lose concentration. So the upgrade outstanding increases it to 6 rounds, which is no longer concentration, so you don't have to worry about that. While you might knee-jerk think, well, concentration is longer, most encounters that you're flipping cards are not going to last more than 6 rounds. And the other thing is that the Torg FAQ has a few concentration erratas. One is, can you maintain abilities that have a duration of concentration for hours on end? Answer, no. At some point, your mind wanders for a brief moment. You lose concentration. Effectively, they end harmlessly at the end of the scene. Another question is, can you cast a bunch of concentration spells, miracles, psionic powers before the start of combat? The answer is usually no. Concentration spells, miracles, psionic powers are combat spells, as are all spells that have a casting time of 1 action, and the intent is for these not to be precast. If you get surprise, that's your precast. If you need an in-game rationalization for this, there's something about the start of battle, either adrenaline rush or something similar, that breaks your concentration, even if merely briefly. Magic, miracles, psionic powers are just weird that way. So that would be a reason why the 6 rounds is possibly better than concentration. As an addition, I personally look at any spell, miracle, psionic ability, etc., and if you roll outstanding and you only want the standard success, you can downgrade without any problem, no question. Just do it. If you want the good success, you can downgrade. If you want to ignore an upgrade, that's fine. So if you wanted to keep concentrating and you rolled outstanding and said, I just want to stop at good and I don't want the duration to be 6 rounds, that is fine. So Jay, what is your take on minor telekinesis and specifically the concentration to 6 rounds?
It's pretty much the same thing, what you said. 6 rounds is often better, not always, but often better than concentration, because not only do you not have to worry about it getting canceled if you get shot or something, it's still going to go, and you also don't have the -2 penalty for concentrating on something. That said, if you do want to concentrate, like the reason that errata happened was to stop people from just like recasting things over and over and over until they got outstanding successes for everything, and then just starting battles with a bunch of outstanding successes. And because they'd already precast, they probably don't need to cast anything else. So the concentration modifiers don't really matter that much at that point. So yeah, that's the biggest thing. The biggest takeaway is you can't leave stuff on long term and prepare for it. As soon as the battle starts, you're like, ah, and the adrenaline just wipes it out, right?
And Mark, you have any takes on concentration specifically, or in general with minor telekinesis?
Well, it's the cheese factor for me, and it's the whole reason that Torg Eternity is a very player-friendly game. The rules set errs on the side of the player. You have for the most part, knock on wood, for the most part, things stack in the player's favor, and we all play online games, and so yeah, we're used to parties buffing before they know there's a big boss through the door, and as soon as they open the door, he's going to turn around and they got to start shooting, and so everybody buffs, and you've got a timer counting on your buffs, and bang, open the door, and all this stuff's going, and we're as powerful as we're going to be, and boom, we burn the boss down, and before the timers run out on our buffs, and off we go. Well, if you as a GM and your players, that's the game you want to play, that kind of power gaming, okay, knock yourself out. It's your Cosmverse, play it the way you want to. Ignore the fact that the FAQ says that concentration drops at the beginning of combat. However, from the standpoint of the game's already weighted in your favor, and it's just a thing that happens because when the bullets start flying, you have that momentary spike of adrenaline or whatever. Okay, it's really happening, and you lose concentration. Yeah, okay, just deal with it and start from round one and put the thing that you want up when your action comes around, or multi-action if you're allowed to, and do two things with a -2 penalty, or build your character so you can do multi-actions without the penalty because that's what you want to do. Go down that path. It's remarkable to me that when a game is built in such a way that it's so favorable to the players, and yet I still want more. I'm like, okay, that's, at some point we just got to, from a GM standpoint, at some point you just got to look at it and go, okay, we're just getting silly at this point. And concentration is one of those things. It goes down at the beginning of combat. You can't walk in with 8 things going in the air because you want to be uber powerful and erase the big bad guy in one round. That happens all the time anyway. With exploding
Yes.
dice and possibilities and drama cards and alertness and situational awareness and all of these combinations that we didn't think about that come up all the time when astute players go, oh, I can do this thing. And all of a sudden this thing happens and the GM's sitting there going, I didn't even get to spin up the big thing that was so cool that I worked an hour to figure out how to do. You just killed my guy. Okay, so he's down. What are we doing now? And I mean, just trust GM, play the game, have fun.
Another thing I'd add is the stacking things like concentration can lead also to a situation that occurred. And again, this is Torg Eternity, but other games that we've played and are familiar with sometimes can bleed into the philosophy because it's all role-playing games. But a game that allowed you to do some buffs and keep the buffs going, and then it became as a way to just streamline the don't open the door until we get our buffs up.
Right.
So then what happened is you can have X many of these predetermined, effects going, and then they went, oh, okay, those are in effect, so before you open the door, I want to cast. Let me cast. And then the other person said, wait, if he's going to cast, I want to start casting. And then, the thief's like, well, if they're going to do that, I'm going to hide in the shadows. And you just got it to where nobody's actually opening the door to do everything because everybody has got these predetermined effects going, but they even want the the round, the pre-round, type thing to start. So
and all this mumbling and arcane gestures and bullshit outside the door, and the monster goes, "Hello,
Yeah.
yes, we gave it the office. Go away."
Yes.
Close the door because we'll be
Or
with you in a second, sir.
They're all prepared, and then the party gets mad because they ambush. But we spent so much time prepping. Well, yes, and it was all verbal and your spellcasting. But that's just a thing that I think one of the reasons the FAQ added that errata was, as Jay said, to prevent the I'm just going to keep casting until I get outstanding, and the let's do all this concentration and then let's do this extra thing at the beginning, etc. So this might bleed into the next question, which is about celerity, which is it allows the psychic to ignore -2 or -4 if outstanding multi-action penalties. Does this also apply to concentration powers? My team's psychic recently used this to frankly preposterous effect, and I'm wondering if I was too lenient in my adjudication. Many thanks, ASA. So ASA for celerity, it ignores multi-action penalties. Concentration is not a multi-action. It's a ongoing thing of having spells with that duration not expiring unless you lose concentration. So that it's not like you can have, okay, I cast this spell and I'm concentrating, or doing this psychic ability and I'm concentrating, and then I do this next one and I'm concentrating, and normally that would give me a -4, but I'm going to use this multi-action negator to then be able to do another psychic power or spell or whatever, and not have to have a penalty to my roll. Those multi-action penalties, concentration, are not the same thing. So Jay, did you have any words of wisdom about this?
Yeah, just concentration is a totally different type of penalty than a multi-action penalty, just like a size penalty or a concealment penalty. They do not... You can't get rid of a size penalty with something that gets rid of a multi-action penalty. I'm quite curious what they were doing, though.
Yeah, that's
I'm frankly
very
preposterous effect, because unless you get an outstanding success, celerity is a wash, right? Because you're adding a new effect. Actually, let me double check. Is celerity a concentration effect, or is it a
duration 3 rounds?
Okay, so I guess so. At best, you're getting rid of 2 for casting, spending a round. So my thought, and this is kind of probably why we were talking about it, is that they must have been coming into combat with a bunch of rolling buffs or something. But if there was some crazy combo they were doing, let us know. I'm just kind of interested.
Curious minds want to know.
Yeah, very interested to know what the crazy combo was that was going on that prompted that. Because we're like, it says multi-action. Concentration's not a multi-action, it's a concentration. So we were kind of, and I can understand how that might, I can see how you could try to make the argument that I am doing something when I am concentrating, and therefore that is an action, and so I should be able to erase that -4 when I'm concentrating on a couple of things. And with this one, and I'm like, no, okay, but there at a point you have to separate the mechanic from the real world, if you will, and say, well, what does the game mechanic say? Because we have to have a mechanic to make the game work, and it has to. There's a word I'm looking for here, and I can't remember what it is, but it doesn't shatter the verisimilitude of I'm in a game as a superhero or as a technomage or whatever, to say this mechanic works this way, and you just have to accept that's what it does. Well, why does it work that way? Why does magic work? Because it's magic. Why does concentration work? Because it's concentration.
Yeah, and I do completely understand how you might read concentration rules and just see the -2 for each one that you're concentrating on and mentally just think, oh, multi-action. But you don't have that penalty doesn't apply to if you're doing any other thing except for mystic effects, the spells, the miracles, the psionic powers. That's all that it affects. It doesn't affect anything else. And then if you take damage, you have to make a concentration check, or you can lose all your spells and whatever that you have concentrated on. And as Jay pointed out before we started, that also applies to successful interaction attacks against you. So if you have that low charisma and they taunt you and they get you all riled up, you've lost your concentration for everything.
And that concentration check is not an action. It's whether or not you hold your concentration successfully through the thing that's happening to you. You're not doing anything. You're successfully resisting what's going on,
and that's a free action.
It's a free action. It just happens because that's the game mechanic too. How do we adjudicate whether whatever the I shot at you with a god meter. Well, what does that look like? I don't know. That's a game. It's a god meter. It goes off. Bang. There's noise. Whatever. But how do we adjudicate, did you successfully resist that effect going off near you? Yeah, okay, concentration effect. Otherwise, you're going to stack up all kinds of penalties that are, it'd be unmanageable when you have all this stuff going on. That's an action, this is that, that's a that, that's a that.
So hopefully that explained things, and we do thank you, ASA, for the email. And again, you can email us also at torgdcd@gmail.com. So now let's dive into Act 3 of Fires of Ra. Yes, back to the Fires of Ra, Expedition into Darkness. Scene 1, the tunnels below. So Jay, what are your thoughts about the tunnels below?
This is pretty much just a briefing scene. It's there to showcase some Nile architecture and introduce a couple of characters, including Joe Molson. So about my group, I should mention, it's made up of a combination of people from my original game group, like back in high school and everything. And we are all from a Toronto area. And then it's also made up of people from my old World of Warcraft guild. They're all in the States in various places. So this Joe Molson, aka Zed, was like the lowest hanging frickin' fruit of like making fun of Canadian jokes that could possibly happen, and they just went on and on about it, and the two of us from here just like, this is such an annoying name, So this just really bothered me. But overall, it kind of got everything through. Now, one thing about this, and this is kind of a recurring theme in some of these adventures, it happened in Revenge of the Caradon as well, where there are things in here which are big, like, I guess they're more than Easter eggs, but like they're from classic Torg. So in this we meet Dr. Frest, right? And then in Revenge of the Caradon you've got Tolwyn and like all these things, and they're kind of set up to be like, oh, it's an event. But for new players who don't know anything about the original lore or like history, they're like, okay, just another guy. So you have to kind of really go out of your way to make him more important. Like, no, this is the head of the mystery men. Like, who are the mystery men? I'm like, oh god, okay. So like they're like a main. So you got to explain it, and there is a lot of like actual flavor text to read through here. So like most times, I would recommend definitely getting familiar with what's in here first and paraphrasing it, and adding in some pauses and some chances for players to respond with their own questions. Because Dr. Frest has, it's almost like an entire half page, like a full column of text. If you just read that straight down, you're gonna see your player's eyes.
He's got a full. He has a full page. He has a column. He has a half a page of text.
Their eyes are going to glaze over, right? So you have to really make it engaging and figure out how to let them ask questions and interpose their own RP without derailing it as well. But that said, my group had grand old time making fun of us Molson people, and
Molson people.
and I enjoyed actually like the architecture of the station, and going down the elevator and having like this secret area there. So I thought that was neat. But overall, this is essentially just a briefing scene, but it's a briefing and requisition scene that also includes a lot of fairly important flavor text for the rest of the module. So you have to make sure they pick up on things. Right. But yeah, overall, worked out all right.
Mark, your thoughts on Scene 1, The Tunnels Below?
So Act 3 is possibly my second favorite act in the entire book. I love this act, and it starts off in what I consider to be classic Nile Empire Torg fashion. But before I get into that, this is a great point in between Act 2 and Act 3. If you want to insert a side mission of any kind or a couple of acts of side missions, this is a great spot to do it between Act 2 and Act 3. Because Act 3 picks up, you could almost start the mission. You could almost start the book in Act 3 if you wanted to. Act 1 and 2's got great Nile Empire stuff and is legitimate to the entire story. But if you didn't have Act 1 and 2 and you just had Dr. Fress explain what a Waz Scepter was, you wouldn't miss anything because it doesn't really play into the rest of the story that much, though the Eye of Sebek does, which was at the conclusion of Act 2. So you could work that in and talk about it one way or the other, however you wanted it. Anyway, Act 3 starts off with very classic, and as Jay said, there's this is your opportunity to do resupply with either Streetwise or Persuasion. So if you want to do requisitions, this is Frest's got his underground base that you can walk down into the subway, and then you press on a specific tile and a door pops loose and you walk in, and here's this fantastic base that Dr. Frest and his mystery men operate out of. You do have Zed, which if you didn't like the Joe Molson name, you just call him Zed. I mean, come on now. You got Nakatomi, and you got Raven, and you got Frest. And even if you didn't know anything about these guys, make sure you don't, as a GM, make sure you do not shortchange any of these people because they're going to come up, especially Dr. Frest. Dr. Frest is going to have a significant moment in the adventure later on. You want them to care about him. You want them to like him. You want them to get into it. So it pays to pay attention to this scene and know this scene inside and out because, as Jay said, Frest's got a lot of information to just info dump. And if you just blather through his box text, which I've done it that way, and you can, and you have to be willing to either post it, if you're doing it online, post it in chat and let them come back to it, post it as a handout, which is what I do, and make it viewable by all the players. And or later on when the players go, did we know a thing? You have to be willing to go, yes, you did. Or maybe you were told you might, because there's just a lot that Frest knows. And if you're really, really good with it and you study it hard, you can do what Jay said and make this a fantastic RP opportunity in the Mystery Men's base with Dr. Frest, who is, for those of us who played Classic Torg, it's a cool callback. So, but you've also got Nakatomi, who's Torg Eternity's director, right? So you've got him, or a director. You've got him there, and you can use this guy as another character that can show up in other places, who's Delphi Council. I've got a mission for you. Oh, we met him over there when we did that thing. Raven's also a useful NPC that if you need her, you can move her around. Not remembering that she has a very big. I think she does in this act, but not much more later on. Though there are some opportunities. Just don't shortchange Frest. If you get nothing else out of this podcast, make sure that in scene 1 you make an impression with Frest because he's got kind of a big deal going on later on, if I remember him right.
I will just say, or you could. I agree with Mark. This between 2 and 3 is a very good time to put whatever insert you wish. As I stated at the end of the last adventure, I had actually inserted the first 2 chapters of this in the middle of Powers of
did.
Redux. And then all the additional chapters or acts of power, relics of power Redux came out, and that was kind of the main goal of that group. So I shifted them away. They went on. They got to the end of relics of power Redux, and their characters, not players. I did not traumatize any players. But their characters were extremely traumatized and voluntarily retired that were alive at the end of that. So I took one of the Nile Empire single missions, the Delphi missions for the Nile Empire, and I did that to kind of reintroduce another group into to kind of get back into Torg Eternity. It had been maybe a year or so since they had played Torg Eternity, and kind of like did that. And then I brought them into here, and I replaced Zed. I replaced him because he's an inventor and stuff with one of the old classic Torg characters that was like a dwarf tinkerer. So I brought him as a dwarf, that character that had kind of transformed to Nile Empire, and that's how he got into gadgets. So he was able to give them the gadgets that were gotten. Also, I did the same thing with Requisition. I never had the Mystery Men in my classic Torg game. So I brought in another NPC, and my players tend to like when NPCs that they knew back then, or that they were played as PCs back then, come back into the game. So I just did that as a thing because, as I've mentioned before, my home game doesn't have the Delphi Council, and I use old characters to make it a little more personal for them. It would be different if I played like at a convention or got some new people in it. They're just have been playing, but kind of this was able to start with a new group that didn't do Acts 1 and 2, but what was done in Act 1 and 2 by that other group did have consequences and stuff for these. So I like mixing that up. But this is a good scene. As Jay said, it's a good way to bring in architecture and culture and Nile Empire and stuff like that. So I think it's a solid Requisition scene. Because
absolutely,
there's some that are just kind of like, give me my stuff. Just let me roll my Requisition roll and let's go. This is kind of a nice debriefing, briefing, and Requisition kind of rolled up in one. Plus, he hands out I think it's three different one-time use things that are kind of fun.
Yeah, we didn't even cover that.
So
the gadgets,
there's 3 gadgets. Basically, and he has big names for him: the Sonic Hyperphase Psycho Repulsor,
dual universal pulse rockets, and a mega velocity omni cable launcher.
Right, which is like a grapple hook type thing. I remember calling it
rocket boots, a grappler, and a shooty thing.
I remember my Tharcold Scrapper calling it like my Piva getter, my beer catcher, my vodka bringer over here. But those are kind of fun little gadgets that you give them big names, and then people kind of look at them and go like, "Oh, it's a grapple hook," or "Oh, it's a this thing," that are kind of one time or limited time uses that then the party can use, and they're kind of fun, and they're not overpowered, but they can be extremely useful, used in different situations. I remember my group plus when I played it through it, coming up with really neat ways to use it. But let's move on to Scene 2, Kisangani, Jewel of the Congo. So, Jay, your thoughts on Kisangani, Jewel of the Congo?
I want to just back up a little bit.
Sure.
I'm going to agree with Mark that this actually is probably one of my favorite acts in the adventure. I really like the whole Jungle Queen kind of aspect to it, and I like that it's a Nile adventure that's not in the desert, right? So. And there was a lot of cool horror elements that happened, which we'll get to later. But I was also going to save this until Act 4, but I guess I should bring it up now since you guys talked about it. In my opinion, I could easily cut Act 3 and 4 out of this entire adventure. Like, it's almost its own entire... Now, that's the thing. I like these acts, but I think that they don't really... like... It's almost busy work in a way. It's like it's not as directly focused on the actual end result. It's almost something that could have just been sort of mentioned in a sentence. So I think if you have a group that can't handle doing 7 acts
of the Nile Empire
of the Nile Empire in a row, you could cut out 3 and 4. And it will be a much more, I guess, streamlined process.
Before you go on...
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, finish.
This is why I was going to save it till Act 4. But, I still like those acts, and I think they would actually be almost better if they were their own self-contained adventure. In fact, they could probably use another act as well to, the fallout of what happens at the end of Act 4. So I just think for purposes, as we're talking about taking, maybe putting stuff in between, I'm talking just taking out and doing it later, potentially with a different group, even like Leamon said. So I'm just saying do that with 3 and 4 instead of 1 and 2. But I don't know. Do you want to respond to that before I actually get into scene 2?
Yeah, I do. I'm chomping at the bit for this. So this is I like the combination of 3 and 4 in this book specifically because it is a little different. It's a lot different. It's not in the Nile. It's in the Nile, but it's not in the desert. It's in the jungle. You've got Act 3. I mean, we're talking spoilers on the whole thing anyway. See, Act 3. The purpose of Act 3 is to get the bow, because you're going to give the bow to the Amazons in Act 4, so that the Amazons will support the Delphi Council when you go into Act 5, 6, and 7. So you've got, I mean, it's linked to it. I get what you're saying, where you could hand wave Act 3 and 4 and just say, okay, we've got their support, whatever, and go right after the Eye of Sebek and move into Act 5. But it's just, it's a refreshing it completely feels like a non-railroady thing because the Eye of Sebek is what you're after. You don't know why yet. I know why, because we know why, right? We know what it's going to be used for, and if you've read the book, you know what it's going to be used for too. But now you're not dealing with the Eye of Sebek anymore. The Delphi Council is looking for these reinforcements, and so it makes sense that, okay, we're going to go over here and do this thing. It's still cool in part of the story.
It's like a dogfight going on back there.
It is a dogfight going on back there. My husky is trying to get my German Shepherd to play with him. And they're just, yeah. Anyway, it would not be the Fires of Ra if you cut these two acts out, aside from the fact that they're my favorite acts in the book.
And mentioning, since we did mention the Amazons, that was the other character that I brought in. The very first player I had 2 players in Classic Torg. Very, very first game that they played. The first NPC that was introduced was an Amazon GMPC because there was only 2 people, so I had it.
Right.
And I want to say the first and second card played in that game was Romance Campaign, which made a subplot permanent. So for 30 years, it has been the Corporate Ninja Yakamoto and the Amazon Speranza. So and then
nice.
When we started playing Torg Eternity, one of the players went to play in Amazon and was like Speranza's protege. So I kind of like brought them as a, hey, we want you to do this kind of thing. So then you can, we haven't been able to convince them, but if you do this, then we can get our Amazons on your thing. So I kind of linked everything up, and the even though it wasn't the same characters, the player was like, damn right we're gonna get that bow and get the Amazons on our side. So I always love just bringing all the bad stuff. And if you
interweaving is always fun.
If you've played with the Mystery Men, Dr. Fresh, highly encourage you to bring them back, or whoever, to make it a little more personal to both players and or characters, depending. So yeah, let's move on to
scene two.
Was Jay? Oh yeah, scene two.
Yeah.
Go.
All right. So in Kisangani, this is kind of your typical the Storm Knights arrive in town and have to figure out what's going on, who's their contact, where are they going. But a lot of Torg adventures have this scene. There's just some random dockside ruffians to fight. Probably the coolest part of this is when they meet Henry Killingsworth.
Yes, I like Killingsworth.
And this was one of the ones where the players behaved themselves, and because they met him in the hotel bar, and he was talking about hunting the greatest game, and everyone and all the players were like, oh, we know what he means. But they just civilly chatted with him and, just had a lovely few drinks, and that was about it. They never even attempted to look for the actual boat that it mentions here. They played a connection card immediately, and thus was the arrival of Rafty, who was the boat pilot of that NPC family. So they basically stayed, and then they got in Rafty's boat almost immediately after having some drinks with Killingsworth. It's nice to add that flavor. Like I said, it's in the Congo, so you want to differentiate how it's different than deep in Mobius's like heart of his empire. How it's still like there are shock troopers here, but they're not like controlling everything necessarily. Like it's kind of more like Tatooine, except it's not sand. So that kind of an idea, but they were in and out relatively quick. This was just get some flavor, change out some Destiny cards, off we go. But it did bring in the man, the myth, the legend, Rafty, so that was good.
Mark, your thoughts on scene 2?
So I've said before, I run online. When I run online, I use Roll20 tabletops, and so Kisangani is actual place. You can go to find it on Google Maps, and I pulled out. There are some really cool images you can just yank out of Google Maps for the dam and a number of other things that are talked about in the adventure, and you can pull. I find it very useful to pull those real world elements out and put them into the virtual tabletop when we're talking about actual places in the world and in the game. And so like, this is a real place. I've got a real shot of the dam. I've got a real, because you can find it on Google Maps on their pictures, an overhead shot of that dam near Kisangani and the Congo and the river and a whole 9 yards. And then you get a picture. You can get an actual picture of the Congo. It's like, oh, this is what I saw in my head, and pull that out. So that's what I did as my tabletop. And it in my opinion, it sets the stage and the flavor and the environment really, really well. But this whole scene is all about getting on a boat and going up the river in a jungle, which sounds very much like Humphrey Bogart in African Queen. So my boat captain is Humphrey Bogart, and that's the picture that I used for him. The Barefoot Boy took on a name because he became Amari the Barefoot Boy, and he showed up in a couple of places because I liked him and he was fun as an NPC. Let's see, what else do we have? The Dockside Ruffians were just that. They were just, let's roll some dice and take out some mooks. And Joe Hill was our boat captain, but Killingsworth was absolutely. This is a great opportunity to do that classic, the bad guy sizing you up, and I have no intention of. I mean, it's like Indy in the getting drunk because he thinks what's her name's dead, and he's getting drunk and Belloc shows up and he's like, oh, we got nothing. And then all the kids come and drag him away, and the two guys sat down and had a chat, and you're just waiting for all the bad things are getting ready to happen, and then they don't. Right, and it's kind of a standoff between the two peers, good guy and bad guy. So this is a good scene to me.
Yeah, I also enjoyed this. The Henry Killingsworth. As soon as I said his name, everybody is like, "Oh, he's gonna shoot us." They actually did the option of they invited him along. They were like, yeah, come with us. And I was like, okay, we'll see how this goes. They're like, he's going to shoot us, but we're playing our characters and we're good guys. And, let's do that. But it's a, like both Jay and Mark said, it's a pretty solid scene where you can kind of explain how the Congo is different than the deserts and stuff like that. You can have nice little talk about the dangerous game. You can get the boat captain, get with him and discuss things. So yeah, I think it's a pretty decent setup scene to get things moving. So then we'll go to scene 3, Pirates. So Jay, scene 3.
So this is actually moving down the river towards the lost city of Zembiti. So this is where we get our African queen, or jungle queen, as this could be, as said. Moving along, although some of my players may have turned it into more Apocalypse Now as it went. So,
okay.
So the pirates, it was a pretty. It was a pretty violent encounter. There was, they demanded the ship, and the players refused. And I believe this is where the requisitioned law rocket got used, and totally obliterated their ship. They did abduct the leader, Gabriel Benoit, and for some reason, my players were convinced that he was an agent of Mobius, and they needed to find, they wanted to question him, but they didn't have time. And so this was like, as a designer, it came a very interesting moment, because at this point, I had released my Storm Knight's Guide to Monster Hunters on the Infiniverse Exchange. I originally made it for another player who was upset that the Orange book was going to be so late, so they needed some options now. But in this game, one of my other players was playing an alchemist, Ozzy, and he was using some of the other alchemical perks that I had made that the other person didn't, because he was all in on bullets. Mm-hmm. And this is when I found that there was a totally different use for some of the stuff that I made that I did not think of at all. So one of the new potions is called Corpse-like, and the idea is you drink it and it puts you in suspended animation for 12 hours, and then when you wake up you're fully healed, but you count as dead until then. No one can detect you with any life sensing or anything like that. You don't need to breathe, so you could just stash you're safe, and then you wake up healed. But they were interrogating this guy, and then they're like, okay, when they eventually docked at the temple complex,
oh my gosh,
to go explore, they were like, well, we need to stash this guy somewhere. And so they just fed him Corpse-like and then put him underwater. So they have to come pick him up again later because he was dead. Being underwater didn't affect him, so it was all good. Right? And I was just like sitting there going, "Wow, I did not in my life think of this as a use for this potion." Right? So that was just an interesting thing. But yeah, otherwise the combat itself was pretty easy because one of the characters, the core Earth character, is like huge heavy weapons guy. So a bunch of pirates on a boat is like bread and butter. Like this is exactly what he's been waiting for the entire time. So it was almost. That's what I mean. It's more Apocalypse Now. It's just fire everywhere. They took it out and they continued on without too much trouble until the next scene. We'll get there later.
So, Mark, your thoughts on Scene 3, Pirates?
It wasn't a law rocket for my group. It was a bazooka. But the effect was probably very similar. And I hadn't thought about it until now. But, yeah, Apocalypse Now was very apropos for that. I like the interaction with I pronounced it Benoit. With Benoit and the Jungle Queen, they parlayed with him, and then they blew him up. And he managed to putter away, and I can't remember how he got away, but he got away, and he shows up. I mean, because he shows up later, which we'll get to. It was pretty cut and dry. They nuked him and then headed on to the base camp.
Yeah, I want to say my players were so expecting this to be when Killingsworth, who they invited along, would shoot them, and I actually had him, just to twist assumptions, I had him work with the party the entire time with his big elephant gun shooting the pirates with them. I had him get hit and fall off the boat, so that he could come back later as an opponent. And I don't remember the exact mechanics of it, if it was like one of those random things that you roll in the Nile Empire charts, or if it was something that he did. But he ended up getting a Destiny card, one of the very few chances where an NPC got a Destiny card. And when I, randomly flipped the card and saw it, I was the happiest I have ever been as a Torg game master, because it was an opponent's fail card.
Oh, nice.
Too bad it wasn't Martyr.
Yeah. But no, that was because normally it's something weird like that. It's something not
so completely useless, like romance or something.
Right. So I got that opponent.
Well, I guess
fail,
romance not, but
and I used it as my bookmark so that I wouldn't forget. Like he's gonna come back in this scene and use that. But I don't remember much other than that in the one that I game mastered. So I'm assuming they took care of the pirates relatively quickly in that. But then we get to probably one of my favorite scenes in Act 3, which is Scene 4, the abandoned camp. So Jay, how did the abandoned camp go for you?
So they dunked Benoit under the boat, and then they got out and they started exploring. And they left Rafty on the boat, so they could have easily just left the guy with him, right? But I think they're under the impression that if something happens to all of us, we want him to at least drown. So when he wakes up. But so they start exploring the camp, and they have to start being a little more subtle about the Aurors bleeding through. So because the idea is that there is a nightmare tree that's like a giant banyan tree in this area, so it's Nile/Aurors, but I don't think it starts, if memory serves.
No, it doesn't.
It starts as Nile.
Nightfall.
Yeah, and so I have to kind of stall them long enough for it to get to be nighttime. So they spend a lot of time being distracted by these chimpanzees. In the comic book Knights of the Dinner Table, there was this series. It's a bunch of gamers playing role-playing game, right? So it's like a D&D style game. It's Hackmaster, but there was a storyline where they were going through the jungle and constantly being insulted and harassed by chimps, and I basically just directly stole all of the most annoying things from that. And I would have like the chimps throwing their poop at them, like all of these things. And then the players they got so angry they're chasing these chimps around. But then as it would get darker, the chimps it would be less funny and start to be more like dangerous kind of stuff until eventually I think one of them, Ozzy, the alchemist, occultist, he was like looking at some of the ruins, trying to figure out what was going on. And was like searching through the camp, whereas the merc and the cyber papacy character were basically chasing through the jungle trying to capture these chimps until they started to get attacked by these headless zombies. And mentioning how they were headless was one of the key things to make it a little bit more unnerving. But the sad state of affairs is that these headless zombies are not that difficult. So they're basically like Gospog level. So they were creepy when they came up. It was a neat element, but then as soon as like, oh, we could just multi-attack these guys, get rid of them. So I didn't have them coming in as one horde. They were kind of spread out coming out of the tree line, so they couldn't just do one big super attack. I'm just looking through my map, actually, because I remember this was actually probably one of the neatest battles. They eventually had to retreat back to like the camp itself, and were basically surrounded by, I don't know, like 9 of them, and had to kind of like work drift fire from behind cover, but eventually were able to defeat them. And so it was probably one of the more memorable moments in the act. Yeah, for now.
Mark, your thoughts on Scene 4, the abandoned camp?
I like the camp a lot. As I remember it, we had a good time. Well, I had a good time with the camp being very creepy. A triple canopy jungle is dank and dark to start with, just because of the way that the triple canopy overlaps. So it's very shaded and it's very oppressive to begin with. And we had the whole power lines and everything's everywhere, and there was the reel to reel with the movie that's loaded up with the film, but they couldn't figure out how to get that to work but they desperately wanted to see what was going on, and they ran the film and saw 2 gleaming eyes moving in the darkness, and then boom, it was done. Which was great because you've got this foreshadowing here that comes in from the film when you go figure out how to run. And that's, from the GM standpoint, that this is a good thing for them to want. It prompts them to get the generator running so they have some lights at their disposal. But that comes later. Where were the heads? Because the heads,
I believe they were in the trees or something.
They are in the trees, but I can't remember which scene they're in. I was looking for them. The headless zombies. Is that in the beginning? Is that in scene 1?
It's in it's in base camp. It says there's more effigies hanging in the trees. Taking a closer look at one reveals the mask. Each mask contains a rotting human head. Signs of a struggle are visible. So when they go through getting up by the camp, they notice.
Okay, so it is the abandoned camp when they get in there that they see them when they come in. Yeah, so they've seen them. You can't really tell what they are, and then the zombies, dressed in English-style expeditionary clothes, wander out of the jungle from all angles. And that, to me, if you remember the B-17 vignette from Heavy Metal, the movie, the animated movie, when the zombies come marching out of the jungle at the pilot, the downed pilot, that's when these zombies, the headless zombies, attacked. That was the scene to me. And they were all scattered. If I remember correctly, you guys were all scattered across the camp. There was not this cluster of people. they were all over the place when these guys showed up, and so I think we had 2 over here and a couple over here and one by themselves, and they had to come back together. But it made the zombies more challenging because they are kind of mook gospog zombies, but that's not their strength in the scene. Their strength in the scene is the fact that they don't have any heads, and all of a sudden you go, oh, that's where the heads were, and they'd seen the heads before. So they're fun. They come out of the jungle, but if your players are catching on, they're not the red eyes that were in the movie. There's something, and they should be that should carry the tension for you because there's something else that's not these guys.
Yeah, something cut their heads off.
Yeah, and I always had the chimps up in the trees so that they couldn't get to them, we had a rocket ranger who tried to fly up there, but it's a triple canopy jungle, so it's too thick, and they're tiny nimble monkeys, and so the monkeys scattered up into the trees, and you couldn't really do anything, and so they would always run away, but they were absolutely doing the annoying crap, and everybody was like, these damn monkeys are going to come back to haunt us, because they would always come back, and they would always be watching and following them around. So the monkeys are good. They just don't do anything when they're monkeys. But everybody's going to be like, I don't trust the daggone monkeys.
So I loved this scene because my players completely sabotaged themselves. They absolutely. So sometimes you just don't understand how players can come up with awesome ideas that just take out something, but this one, they spent so much time intentionally doing things that made it worse for themselves. So they get to the abandoned camp and they notice these heads, with these masks, these effigies in the trees. They notice that there's the lights not working, that the generator, have been power has been smashed or broken. The generator's out of fuel. And then they get the generators, they get some fuel from the truck, they bring it over, they fill up the generator, and then the movie projector starts. And then they watch that, and they get to the end, and they are absolutely convinced that whatever bad things are out there hate electricity. And that's why the camp was attacked and abandoned. So they destroyed all electronic components in the camp. They broke the generator. They made sure that nobody could turn on lights. And then darkness comes, and they're in the middle of an Aurora mixed zone with Nile Empire, without lights, darkness penalties. I could not have set it up better. I just sat back and let them bring bad things to themselves, and it was just really fun because you get a lot of times where they outthink you. Well, this time they outthought themselves, and it was just very, very fun that they took everything to mean electricity is going to bring the bad stuff, so we need to get rid of the electricity. So then we can move on to scene 5, City of Death. Jay, your thoughts on scene 5?
The City of Death. So in this one, they continue following the trail, and they have to get past a river. There's a bridge there and a jeep that's kind of crashed. There may be a crocodile fight. And then they reach the actual lost city of Zambidi, which is ruins. They start to explore it, and this is when the chimp antics start to ramp up because now there's booby traps. So anytime they would chase after them, they would hit a booby trap, basically, was the idea. But eventually they move in, and there's a pit, and they can hear someone softly calling out in there. So being the stalwart heroes that they are, the players get over to the pit and they look down. They see there's a guy in there, the last surviving member of the expedition. And then they spend 5-10 minutes arguing about who should go down there. So eventually Jack, the core soldier, soldier of fortune, he gets a rope and he goes down. And that's when the lion comes out of the cave and they have to fight. And the lion actually gets, if memory serves, gets killed like immediately. And they all start cheering, and then all of the monkeys are doing the Kolo Kolo, and it was kind of like the Garignac in Galaxy Quest, when they suddenly realized that the lion was not Kolo, and then so Kolo the Mecha Simian with the pincers comes out, and Jack is just like, I gotta get out of there, and then proceeds to mishap 2 turns in a row, trying to get out and impaling himself on the spikes. So almost dies because of it. And then they have the fight with the Mecha Simian, and like when I explained what he looked like, it showed the picture with the pincers and everything. They were all very impressed by it. Because does he actually have it, or did I add it? I think because I knew how things were gonna go, I gave him a portable shield as well, just to kind of make it last a little bit longer. So they had to get through his shield, and then then actually started damaging, which fueled his blood rage. But between all of them, they kind of ignored the tainted chimpanzees. At this point, they realized, okay, like we could chase after these guys forever, but they can't really do too much to us. So they just all focused on Kolo, and between like there's 4 of them, so they could take him out, even though Jack almost died just from trying to get out of the pit. So that was the thing that stood out to me in this entire act. It was just one of those little moments.
Mark, your thoughts on Scene 5, City of Death?
Very similar. My groups spent more time with the Jeep and the bridge, because the truck and the bridge, because it's blocking all that. And there was quite a bit of work to get around that. And I think I think your group worked really, really hard to push that vehicle off the bridge onto the other side. And it turned out to I don't think it was ever used again, but universally, nobody wanted to fall in the water because crocodiles. Mm-hmm. The pit absolutely was my part, where I was kind of sitting there letting the group kind of make it harder for themselves, because I think you sent 2 or 3 guys down into the pit to deal with the guy down in the pit because he needed healing or help or whatever. And then the lion came out, and they're like, oh good, we've got somebody down here to help. That's combat. We knew there was going to be something to go that we would need them and take out the lion, and then go low, and all of that breaks out up top, and the heavy hitters down in the pit. And so it did. I can't remember how, but I think I recall a round or 2 of difficulty. I think Rod's character had a really hard time getting out of the pit, and it took a round or 2 for the rest of the people in the pit to get out. Sokola was kind of wreaking havoc up above because they left the mostly non-combative kind of people up top. And so he kind of was, I think he got some good hits in up top, but then the battle kind of swung once we got everybody out of the pit. Other than that, the chimpanzees kind of became mooks to keep shock absorbers to keep people away from Kolo, but they waded through them, and off we go.
Yeah, this is I want to say the healer, of course, wanted to go heal the guy, went down there into the pit trap. The lion came, and that person wasn't necessarily a combat person, so combat people went down there. And then Kolo came out, and they started kind of dealing with him. And then this is when I had Killingsworth take a pot shot at one of the Storm Knights, and then the Storm Knights saw him. And that's when the mage had a bunch of cards and spent possibilities and did, lightning bolt for that nice 16 damage AP 4. And I jumped up out of my GM chair, took my destiny card and threw it on the table and just cackled like a maniac. Because it felt so great after, anybody game masters and has seen players do that hundreds and hundreds of times. The one time you're able to do that,
is just a feeling. It's like no feeling in the world. So, and then Killingsworth, laughed, kind of went back into the jungle. And again, they didn't have any lights or anything because they had ruined their light stuff. We're able to finally take out Kolo and stuff and move on to scene 6, the Tomb of Sakana. So Jay, scene 6.
So in this, the characters reach the banyan tree, which is a giant nightmare tree, and it's guarded by Melumok, which is a giant python. And there's a bunch of traps and kind of like a almost mini maze or something to get through, like through the roots of the tree to get to the actual tomb of Sakana. And I did change a couple of things, because in this it just talks about you could get rid of the nightmare tree by killing the victims in its roots. Or setting it on fire. But as we know, there's an actual procedure for getting rid of a nightmare tree, and this group of players had done that like a couple of times before. So I wasn't going to suddenly make it easier for this giant nightmare tree. So they would have to actually do that to get rid of it. But what actually happened was, I believe, half of them stayed out to fight the snake, and the other 2 ran inside to try and get the bow. And that's when they encounter. I have no memory of the Spectre Swarm, to be honest. There's a bunch of spirits there. I'm sure they were there. I just don't remember it at all. And there is the mummy of Sakana herself, who's been corrupted by Orworsh. And they tried using fire on her right away, but because she's a divine mummy, she's immune to fire, so that backfired on her. So there was a little bit of a fight with Sakana on the inside. Now, on the outside, I believe it was the Cyber Papacy character, Zoe, staying out to tank the snake, and I think Akrik, the Edinos Optant. And then inside was Ozzy the Alchemist and Jack the Merc. So outside, while they were fighting the snake, that's when I had Killingsworth make his attack. And I don't remember the circumstance of exactly how this happened or why I adjudicated it this way, but he basically aimed and then he botched his shot, or he shot into combat, and he basically ended up killing the snake by accident. So a shot rang out, the snake falls, they look around and they're like, oh my god, what was that? And Killingsworth, I just gave them a little side cutscene of him going, blimey. And then he just picking up his rifle and he got out of there, right? He didn't even stick around to fight them or anything, he just left. So they never actually found him, so he got away totally scot-free, but he didn't really accomplish anything. Meanwhile, inside the fight with Sakana, they eventually overcame her, and then I believe while Jack the mongrel was fighting her, Ozzy was actually uprooting the tree, so they also got the tree uprooted, and then basically finished her off once the Ororsh influence wore off, and acquired the bow of Sakana, the Eternity Shard needed for the next act. And everyone was successful. They came back, they met with Rafty, they picked the guy up, and they said, we're just going to deliver Benoit to the Delphi Council. And the Delphi Council was like, we don't want this guy. So he just went to prison. So overall, great success. But yeah, there was it was kind of funny that Killingsworth just totally failed.
Mark, your thoughts on the last scene, Tomb of Sakana?
So there's a lot jammed into this one scene. Melamuk and the Nightmare Tree and the Tomb all in this one scene, and I kind of, from a game master standpoint, I lament that that's that's all in this one scene, because it almost seems like you could play that up into almost 2 or 3 scenes. But this is what we have. So Melamuk attacked our group, and this is exactly when Sir Arthur Killingsworth opens fire, and he shoots one of the characters square in the back, Yaron. And then one of the Storm Knights blasted Sir Arthur Killingsworth, who rolls a 1 on his soak for 2 wounds.
So it was one of those. Yep.
Yeah, it was. And in the process, two of the other Storm Knights deal with the snake, and Killingsworth realizes that all of his advantage is gone, and he's just been blasted for 2 wounds, and he needs to get out of dodge, and so he does. But in the process, I can't remember if Killingsworth shot Crag or if Crag got hit by Melamuk, and he gloriously soaked, so he had a glory at that point. But they did defeat Melamuk, whose lifeless body slipped through the trees, thrashing limbs loose, and he revealed in his death throes and thrashing about, he revealed the tomb, and kind of knocked some branches around so that the plane was revealed. So they climbed up to the plane, and I cannot remember what happened. I think somebody had a botch in the plane, and the plane fell out of the tree.
That sounds familiar.
With somebody in it.
A couple of us, I believe, tried to climb up to it, and one of us messed up.
And we had a Jurassic Park thing with the car coming out of the tree, getting ready to run through people, and there was this panic as it's coming down through the trees and all this other. It was pretty cool. But Crag ended up burning the Nightmare Tree, which didn't really deal with the Nightmare Tree so much as he had enough, and he called down fire on it. But they did go into the tomb and defeat Sakana, retrieving her bow. The tomb in this scene is really well done, in my opinion. I like the Spectre Swarm, the combination of the Spectre Swarm and the Mummy and the knee-deep water, and the way that it plays out. This is a very unique fight. For GMs, you need to pay attention to how this flows and what it does, and what the Spectre Swarm can do, and what people can do to the Spectre Swarm, because it's ethereal, semi-ethereal, and so it's not as easy to deal with as, and it shouldn't be, but it's also something that they aren't like incapable of dealing with, and it's a lot of fun. It's a good fight because it's different. It's not just let me slog in there and roll dice and hit things and cause damage. It's kind of unique with the water and the spectral swarm and the mummy that pops up and disappears and pops up and disappears. And so it's fun. It's a lot of fun. But in the end, the Benoit showed up again, and they looted the tomb pretty heavily and had all this other neat stuff. And when Benoit showed back up, they kind of, instead of just, we're tired of you, and just shot everybody, they parlayed with him, and they traded all of the loot they got except the bow for their safe passage, and Benoit let them go. So they succeeded in getting the bow, and because it wasn't that they needed the loot, they just needed the bow, and Benoit had nothing to do with their objectives. He was just an obstacle, and so we don't need to kill him, we just need to get past him. And so they chose, I was kind of impressed that they chose a different way to get by the bad guy, instead of just let's blast him and knock him out or kill him and go on. So that's how our side ended.
I'm sort of like Jay. I don't remember a lot of what my party did. I remember more of what I did as a player with Mark. I remember the big python. I remember the water, the mummy, the specter swarm. Again, my players had basically ruined their own lighting sources and such. So that made things a little iffy. I know they got through it, though, because we got through the whole book, but and I do like the water. The mummy is a lot different. I remember them being extremely happy that they got the bow, because that got them they really wanted to hook up with the Amazons. A couple of the characters, probably in more way than one, but they got their accomplishment, and then headed on towards Act 4. So we will go ahead and stop there. Any overall thoughts on Act 4? Or, sorry, Act 3, Jay?
One thing I remembered is that all of Sakana's jewelry, Akrik, the Gold Sun, Optin just put it on and basically wore it for the rest of the adventure, and refused to give it to the Delphi Council or to ever take it off. So he now had the Eye of Sebek and all of Sakana's jewelry. So he was getting more and more blinged out the longer this adventure went, because this all had a story to it. Like, to his mind, it was all still not dead things, so it was all good. You know, it was all Katakal's kosher, right? So, but yeah, overall, I do really like this act, and it had some memorable parts. It's when you've played through so many of these adventures, just like the combats kind of meld in your mind, and you don't really remember too much about a specific fight or even a boss fight necessarily. But it's a lot of the other events, like the giving the guy corpse-like and stashing him under the water, the injuring yourself trying to get out of the hole numerous times, Killingsworth failing, the civil discussion and Rafty. All of these things really added to it. And yeah, I really like this one, and it was nice to just not be in the desert.
Mark, any final thoughts for Act 3?
This is a really nice culmination of this act. I mean, you're rolling in through the jungle, you find the lost city. It feels like the Rule of Two, just because you don't have the desert everywhere, and that you have all of the Nile Empire weird science stuff with Kolo and the brain, the exposed brain with the glass dome helmet thing, Killingsworth showing up doing Nile Empire villain stuff and disappearing and getting away. You got all of the elements that make Nile Empire, but it's not, as Jay said, it's not in the desert, it's in the jungle, which is fine, because you got, this is Torg Eternity, you've got wherever the realities are. And then you've got a Rorsch popping up in the middle of all of this, just to add even more flavor. And it's not there in the beginning. Everybody's expecting, oh yeah, we're going to do Nile Empire stuff in the jungle, and here we go. And hey, wait, there are little heads and effigies of people. What's going on there? And then there's this creepy movie. And about the time, if your players are not paying, and if you've played a bunch of Torg Eternity, the first guess in the jungle is going to be a nightmare tree. But the banyan tree is still really nicely done as a nightmare banyan tree. And Melamuk being around the banyan tree is really great, because nobody expects that. The nightmare tree is a threat on its own, and then you put a frickin' truck-sized python around it, and I go, oh my, what do we got to do with that? And Kolo and the chimpanzees. I just really like it. This is a great. Sakana's Tomb is a nice ending to this. There should have been. I think that should have been split out. And I don't like 7 acts or 7 scenes in an act, but that should have been its own, in my opinion.
I could see where that, an outside, inside, 2 different scenes could be split. That, I think, would be fine. But no, I really liked this act. I thought that it was pretty solid. I completely agree with Jay. I can read it and remember, okay, they were supposed to fight this and that, but it's those little personal touches that your players bring out that really make it. So as a game master, I heavily suggest not just reading it and going, okay, the players have to do it this exact way. If the players come up with other things to do, let them at least try other
Roll with it.
things. And if they're going completely like my players, I just let them do it. I didn't like try to make them. I wasn't thinking as a game master going, okay, they're gonna really mess it up for themselves when Aurora comes at night. So maybe I'll have them make a mind test or a knowledge or science or scholar or something. No, I just let them go with it, and they had a lot of fun. And then once they realized that it wasn't the electricity, that it was just nighttime, and then they had messed up their chances of seeing in the dark at nighttime with darkness penalties, it just made it fun. They realized that they had did that to themselves. They rolled with it. They got past it, and then that's why I have this fun story to tell instead of saying, yeah, I let my players know what was going on because I felt bad for them. An extreme example of that might come up next time in the next act, but otherwise, no, very, very nice scene. Again, the next 2 weeks, there will be no Delphi Council debriefings, but we should get back the week after that. Do email us at torgdcd@gmail.com. Send us your emails. We'll read those. We'll answer your questions like we did today, or we'll read your comments and comment back. Other than that, we hope you have fun in your own Cosmverse. So, bye.